Saad Yacoob, PhD candidate at Georgetown University, working on Islamic modernity and philosophy. And honestly, you don't need any introduction for our viewers who already know you. Thank you so much for coming back on the Ansari podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on, brother.
Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure being back on, Mahmoud. Yes, I don't think I need any introduction to your audience anymore, but that's both a good and a bad thing, right? Because sometimes too much of a good thing is a bad thing, right? So
Nah, man, we can never get enough of you. If people keep asking me to have you back on, I'm just like, we just had him on last week. You and I, when we release this video, are going to be competing a lot with content out there. And one of the major contents that you and I have to compete with in the Muslim space is the Dawah content. And I had a live the other day where I personally went off on the Dawah content because I think it has increasingly diminished. And no one has put a brake on them. We've put brakes on liberals. We do a good job of that. But when it comes to our conservatives, we don't put a brake on them. Because they have gotten to a point, someone said that one of the reasons they mentioned the Dawah Bros, that they do this, that they do these debates with God logic and 1 verse 20 and 30 verse 50 and all this stuff.
Stuff.
Is that, that is the way to show that these guys are arrogant and these guys are, unwilling to see the truth. And it's like, well, why would you create an environment where the only debate you have is one between two people unwilling to see the truth? So I have been thinking about this, and I'm like, man, if I walk in on another 30-year-old Muslim guy eating dinner and watching, you're finished, you're ruined, I got you. Oh, no. If I see one more of those, I'm going to lose my mind, because there's no way you and we can build an empire with this kind of nonsense.
So I just want to preface this by saying that I have never in my life watched, I think, an entire video by a Dawah bro.
Neither have I.
Not necessarily because I don't find the content riveting. Maybe I probably won't find the content riveting. I have a lot of other things to do in my day, right? So this is not me throwing shade at anyone, because I cannot throw shade at anyone because I don't know who these people are. People ask me about people, like they name names, and I'm like, sir, I've never seen a video of this person in my life. But I can tell you this. There's a really interesting history to debate in the Muslim world. And that history goes all the way back to the 2nd century Hijrah. Actually, probably even before that. And debates between Christians and Muslims, in particular, 2nd century. In fact, the entire movement to translate Aristotle into Arabic started with debate. And the reason why I started with debate was because Muslim scholars would go and they would debate these Christians, and they'd get the floor wiped with them. Like, they would just get wiped out by these Christians. And they were like, what is going on? Like, why are we constantly losing in debates? And eventually they came to the realization that they had something that the Muslim scholars didn't. And that was the rhetoric, Aristotle's rhetoric. And so that was, which is the major book of Aristotle on things like anything to do with rhetoric, really. And that was the manual for the Christian debaters, where it wasn't the manual for us. And that started the whole translation movement. That's one of the ways that they say that the translation movement actually started.
Why were we getting the floor wiped? Why did we need Aristotle to prove Islam was true?
Because it turns out that human beings think logically in certain ways and don't think logically in other ways. And so there are many different types of debating techniques. For example, one of the ways that you can, one of the very popular ways in debate is to make an emotional appeal, right? But if you are not able to pinpoint exactly what is an emotional appeal and is not an emotional appeal, you can't call the person out and say, by the way, this is an emotional appeal, doesn't have anything to do with the actual facts of the matter. You can get caught up in the emotional appeal.
Oh, I see.
And
You don't know
so,
the tactics.
exactly, you have to know the tactics of debate,
I
right?
see.
Not everybody is going to be a natural master debater, but what ends up happening is because somebody else has studied all of the different aspects of debate. If they know they're losing something on a logical level, they can switch to an emotional argument and be able to catch you emotionally where you don't really know how to deal with that kind of argument, right?
Mm.
Or you might you might have the right argument, but you didn't structure it logically, and so the other person can attack the structure of your argument without having to attack the form of it.
I see. And now a quick message from our sponsors. Assalamu alaikum. You've heard the lectures on riba. You know it's a problem, but no one's ever given us a solution. That's exactly why I'm partnering with Dr. Rami, a successful dental surgeon and the founder of My Debt Clinic. The Debt Clinic is removing hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt every single day and bringing debt relief to millions across the nation. Whether it's credit card debt, personal loans, or private student loan, the consultation is completely free, no upfront fees. And here's what I love about them. They don't just help individuals. They support masajid and humanitarian organizations in the United States and all across the world. This is a company that actually shares our values. Don't suffer in silence. There are brilliant Muslims out there trying to serve this ummah, and Dr. Rami is doing exactly that. So if you've been burdened by debt, then take the first step today. Visit mydebtclinic.com/Ansari and speak to a debt doctor. And when you reach out, let them know that Ansari sent you. Assalamu alaikum. Provision Capital is a Sharia-compliant real estate firm built on trust, scale, and purpose, with investments in residential real estate all across the United States, and their focus is ethical investing. Provision Capital has a historical annual track record for the past 10 to 15 years. Visit provisioncapital.com and join over 400 investors nationwide to begin ethically investing your money today. Invest in Provision Capital today and invest in an ethical future. Okay, so what did this cause? What happened? We translated Aristotle and started going through this phase?
So we became really good at debate. There was an entire genre of entertainment, court entertainment called munazara, which is debate. There are so many of these recorded debates. Like, for example, there's the debate of the philosophers versus the grammarians that Tawhidi records. This is probably 3rd century Hijra, so probably like the 800s. So one of the most famous debates in Islamic history is between two competing schools of grammar, the Basran school and the Kufan school. The Basran school was represented by Sibawayhi, and the Kufan school was represented by Al-Kasai. And Kasai, the debate actually went all the way to court. Where they basically sued each other over a grammar issue, and he presented evidence from a Arab tribe that they spoke in a certain way, and Sibawayhi was so distraught he actually died.
He died from losing?
He died from losing.
Talk about a sore loser.
No, actually, you have to understand like what's happening here. The debate was one of the ways that they actually tested the mettle of their theories. So Sibawayhi had worked at the book of Sibawayhi is the most comprehensive work of grammar, right? And Sibawayhi and his teacher Khalil bin Ahmad al-Farahidi, they are two of the major geniuses of the Islamic tradition. Al-Farahidi was the first person to record the meters and the patterns in Arabic poetry. But to do that, he had to memorize basically all of existent Arabic poetry at the time, and then sit down and figure out the mathematics of it and how they're arranged, and then create a system out of it. His student was a Sibawayhi, and Sibawayhi basically did the same thing, but for grammar. How is grammar functioning? And so he had this robust and very just significant theory. It's honestly the discovery almost of Arabic grammar is one of the major accomplishments of human civilization, period, of human knowledge. And Sibawayhi was the one to like really systemize it. So when he loses in court, is his entire life's work being shown to not work. And that hit him really hard.
But I thought you just said that he was the first and he made but he
So,
got proven all wrong?
well, he thought it got proven all wrong. But
Oh.
his students came and they kind of defended his work. But in that moment, he believed that his entire life's work had been destroyed. And so he was so distraught that he actually died. And so debate is a very significant part of Islamic history. Some of it comes down to actually testing our theories. But others, actually, it turns into entertainment. And this was very often in court. Where the nobles and the king would sit around and they were like, okay, you come, you guys don't like each other, debate. Others, they were very significant, like Imam Ahmad versus the Mu'tazila. This was one of the major significant moments of Islamic history. But it takes a massive turn during colonialism. And what happens in the colonial era is these missionaries start doing these debates with Muslims. And Muslims... this is recorded. The Indian context of this is recorded in like if you want to read more about this, you can read a book called Islamic Revival in British India by Barbara Metcalfe, and she has this section in there. Like the whole thing is not about this, but there's a section in there about debate. And what Metcalfe talks about is you would have these massive debates. These are public debates, okay? By the way, very importantly, this is for the first time in Islamic history, probably, debate became a public spectacle instead of something that the elite kind of reveled in. Because the idea was you can't actually enjoy these debates unless you are learned in the sciences.
So when you say that, are you saying who's debating became more public? Because I think
the
we've been
audience
debating.
became public.
Oh, but I think remember Imam Malik used to get upset with one of his students who did it. It's been since the beginning.
Oh, sure, but what I mean by the audience is the audience being public is one of the first times is because previously, particularly after the 2nd century Hijrah, these were audiences of educated people who were educated in these sciences on either side, standing there and listening to it to try to figure out where the holes in their sciences are to go back and kind of fix it, or to convince the elite to adopt a position on something.
Okay.
The public spectacle of debate is something that's very kind of 1800s onwards, and one of the key areas where that happens is in colonial India. And the missionaries really start this kind of. The missionaries want to show that their ideas and their advancements, like European advancements in particular fields of knowledge, have made Islam obsolete because obviously they want to convert everybody, right? And this aspect of the missionaries being very interconnected with the colonial government is it goes back quite a bit, and so. In fact, public education in India started by the missionaries because they were trying to start the conversion process through education. But what ends up happening is these debates turn into public spectacles. Everybody comes together, and you got your side, I got my side, and everybody's just yelling and shouting, right? And the arguments are mostly nonsensical. Sometimes bona fide scholars would go and participate in these debates, but they would just go and they would just kind of like retell the positions, like, oh, okay, our position is this and this and this and this. There wouldn't really be a
battle
of real intellectual rigor, right? Our current debate environment goes back to, I think, the New Atheist movement. And particularly the kinds of debates that the new atheists would do with all kinds of theists, right? Whether they're Muslim or Christian, especially the Christians, right? This is where William Lane Craig became very famous for a while.
Is this the early 2000s back?
Yes, exactly.
Sam Harris,
right?
and all that crap. Yeah.
So probably the most proficient of the Christian debaters was William Lane Craig, who is probably the foremost apologist of of Christianity within certain circles. And William Lane Craig is interesting because he actually did his PhD on Ghazali and Ghazali's argument for God's existence. And he uses what he calls the Kalam cosmological argument to defend Islam. No, to defend Christianity.
That's interesting.
But this kind of early 2000s debate stuff, right? It did serve a purpose. And when around that time, I was teaching late 2000s. I was teaching what we called Saturday school in our masjid because Sunday school was for the young kids, and we did Saturdays for the older kids. And so I was teaching, 9th and 10th graders. And the new atheist wave was kind of ripping through their high schools, and the new atheist kids would come and they would try to debate with the Christians or the Muslims or the whatever, right? And these kids would come with a lot of baggage. And one of the things that I realized very quickly when they were asking me questions, like some of the really, really nonsensical, farcical questions that the new atheists would pose, like, can God create a rock so big that he can't lift it, or the giant spaghetti monster, and like all these kinds of nonsense stuff. Which, like, if you've ever studied anything in Kalam, you're just like, oh my God, like this is not even serious philosophy,
No.
right? And so these, what I realized is, our kids didn't actually care about the answer. What they cared was that they didn't want to feel stupid for believing in God. And what they felt when they didn't know the answers to these questions was they felt stupid. And they felt Islam was stupid. And they felt that that to be religious was to be stupid. And so what I ended up doing was, instead of answering the questions because they're really very easy questions to answer, instead of answering those questions, I actually taught my lessons in a way that they were as complicated as possible. And I would speak in very difficult and obtuse language on purpose.
Why?
Because I wanted the kids to feel as if that Islam was so intelligent that when they went to their weekend school to study it, they didn't understand it. And actually, it had a like, and I don't mean by that, like, I'd be like, God is one, and then go into like this entire discussion of like what one means. No, there were certain things that you could teach them. Like, I would teach them in a very normal thing, but if they would ask me questions, certain questions, I would speak very difficult language, like in very difficult language, in very obtuse ways, and try to make the answers very difficult for them to understand, or rather, not even difficult for them to understand, but like talk above what I knew they would be able to handle, simply because I wanted them to go home and feel that they're not stupid for believing in God.
You wanted to show them there's levels to this thing.
Exactly, right? I didn't want them to feel like 1, 2, 3, Allah loves me is all Islam ever is, right? Like, one of the major issues we have as American Muslims in particular, but I would say as Muslims around the world in general, is that we don't have a robust way in which, there are pockets of it, but there's not a very serious, robust explanation of Islam in the current contemporary context in a way that shows the full intellectual breadth of Islam as a tradition. And so most people, they just, whenever they want to feel intellectual, they want to kind of scratch the intellectual itch, they look like they're reading in English, and they're reading what we would call secular sciences, right? Whether it's physics, or it's philosophy, or it's history or something, whatever they have that itch, right? They're not interacting with Islam. So they come with the kind of training that Islam is 1, 2, 3, Allah loves me. But if I want to have real serious intellectual discussion, then that I have to go to something that's outside of Islam. And most of those people who are having those serious intellectual discussions are not only are they not Muslim, they don't believe in God. And so it becomes very quickly association, because the brain does a lot of association. The association is Islam true but stupid. The non-Muslim stuff, maybe not true, but very smart.
So what was the outcome of that? How does this lead to the new atheist age that started in the 2000s and the modern day debate style that we see today?
So I mean, if you ever go back and watch like Sam Harris early on, or you watch God Help Us All, Christopher Hitchens, or even more difficult to not punch in the face, Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
Richard Dawkins, by the way, might be one of the most stupid, smart people in the world. He's very smart in his field, I'm sure, but he is, like, outside of his field, you're like, buddy, do you need help tying shoes? Yeah. He is really...
Even the conclusions on his own theories, like the selfish gene, very interesting theory. His conclusions are so stupid.
There are some people, I think it was Orwell who said that some ideas are so stupid only intellectuals believe them, and I think people like Sam Harris and Dawkins are
right
there on that.
Yeah.
But this is a great quote, by the way. If ever an intellectual comes in, it's like, I know you have to look at the reality of the modality of the. You just be like,
if they struggle like Jordan Peterson to articulate just even one thought, that's when you know.
Well, that depends on what the meaning of is, But basically, what ends up happening is this kind of moment, right, of the new atheists. It creates a certain kind of understanding of what it means to have intellectual discourse in many circles, particularly religious circles. And that intellectual discourse, and by the way, the new atheists lost. Right, like hands down, the new atheists lost, and so there is a certain triumphalism that comes out of the new atheist movement for the religious folk, right? Where there's this feeling that, okay, we can actually accomplish something through debate.
Well, actually, I think they destroyed Islam and Judaism, they destroyed Christianity and Judaism, and Islam was the only one that survived through it.
I mean, if you listen to some, like, for example, Sam Harris has this debate with William Lane Craig on the nature of morality, and William Lane Craig is asking Sam Harris a very basic question, and Sam Harris actually doesn't comprehend. He is so lost that he doesn't even comprehend what the question is. And because Sam Harris, he basically like puts forward this kind of utilitarian idea of morality, and William Lane Craig's basic premise is that you cannot have morality without religion. And Sam Harris just kind of puts forward his idea of utilitarianism, and William Lane Craig keeps asking me, yes, but why is that good? Why is that if somebody doesn't do it, why do you look at them and say you should do that?
Yeah, define righteousness.
Exactly,
the most difficult thing to define if you don't have God.
If you don't have God, and because what it comes down to is normativity, right? Even if something is good, even if something is beneficial, right? Not the word good, is beneficial for everyone altogether. Why must I do it? Right? It's a difference between description and prescription, right?
You know what? It was actually Socrates that helped me recognize the definition of righteousness, obviously with his Euthyphro conversation.
Right.
But what Socrates, subhanAllah, I feel like he was a prophet. And I'm literally rereading his conversation with Euthyphro.
Well, you're not alone.
Yeah, really?
There was a large kind of group of Muslims who believe that Plato and Socrates may have been prophets.
Because what's interesting about Socrates is that he got killed for going against their gods and preaching to the young something else. And one of the things that he talks to Euthyphro about is, what does righteousness mean? What do you think about this? I think righteousness, and I believe righteousness, all the definition is whatever God loves. And evil is whatever God does not love.
Well, this is interesting because that is one of the definitions that is given to him. Right, in the Euthyphro,
but it's whatever the gods love. And remember, then he breaks down how you can't have multiple gods and have morality.
Yes, but it's also he does a subject object thing, right? Which is you have something that is loved, right? Is it loved because
It is good.
because it is something that it is in and of itself, right? So, like for example, watermelon, right? It is loved. Is it loved because it is watermelon, or is it loved because I love it, right?
Can I tell you what I think? I think it is good because God loves it.
Eventually, I mean, so interestingly, when I taught my class on justice and the state in the Islamic tradition, we started with the Euthyphro. We began our entire discussion on justice with the concept with Euthyphro, because the Euthyphro has a very important. It's not a one-to-one correlation, but it has an important correlation between the later debates that the Mutakallimin get involved in about the knowability of right and wrong and good and bad, and whether or not the human intellect can actually access what is good or bad or right or wrong.
Yeah. And I think the evidence for it is sometimes Allah says something's bad in the Quran, and then his evidence for it is, I don't like it. لا يحب. Allah does not like this. Allah does not love this.
So there are three distinct ways of thinking about right or wrong. What's called tahsin al-taqbih, which is the how something becomes good or how something becomes evil in the Islamic tradition. One of them, and this is kind of the Ash'ari position, which is that, God does as he wills, and whatever he says is, right? There's the Mu'tazili position, which is that, no, you can't, if you do a rational, kind of exploration of the universe, you will be able to, by your own intellect, come to those things which are right or wrong. But the interesting thing is that the Islamic tradition, especially the post-classical Islamic tradition, which is after Ghazali, so Ghazali dies in 1111, so that's kind of like when you say the post-classical tradition. The post-classical tradition, even the Ash'aris come to the point where they don't believe that God just says stuff. Everyone believes at the end of the day that there is a system to it. And the Maturidis, which is one of the Orthodox schools, have their own way of thinking about it, and the Ash'aris, another of the Orthodox schools, have another way of thinking about it. But everyone is agreed that God doesn't just arbitrarily give orders; that all of them have a reason.
Well, he has laws. He has a system, right? But even sometimes we can't access it. Like, for example, hell.
Yes,
hell
I
is
get asked about that weekly.
Hell is one of those things where Allah calls it evil. Allah calls it a bad, horrible, evil place to be.
Well,
but it is of Allah's creation.
You have to be very difficult. We have to be very careful when you use the word evil. Okay, the Islamic tradition, it makes a differentiation between what is mamduh and madmum. Okay, what is praiseworthy and what is blameworthy. Right.
Like when he says كأنهم رؤوس الشياطين, right? Like when Allah says things like and the fruits of the tree will even look like the heads of devils. It's like, are you like he's talking about it in a good, like as if this is normal. This is normal.
Yes. But hell is not blameworthy. In the sense that the existence of hell is not blameworthy. Or the things that are happening in hell, not because at the end of the day, morality, right? Good and evil are moral categories, right? Good is the moral category of that which is praiseworthy, and evil is the moral category of that which is blameworthy, in and of itself, right? Hell is not blameworthy in its existence.
Blameworthy, define blameworthy and praiseworthy.
If I slap somebody for no reason, I can look and say, "Hey, man, why'd you do that? What's wrong with you?" Right? That's blameworthy. If I slap someone because I'm trying to defend him from defend a woman who's getting mugged, like the guy is mugging a woman, right? But like, hey, you did good.
I see.
Right?
You can't hold anything against
exactly
God for hell.
Exactly.
It's not blameworthy.
Right? It's not blameworthy in that sense, right? And so this is why, like, there is a word in its denotation and then a word in its connotation, right? A word in a denotation is the actual dictionary definition of that word. The connotation is how we use it sometimes, right?
Okay.
The kind of what we call the majazi meaning, the metaphorical meaning.
Yeah.
So you can have, for example, you can say that hell is evil, but in its denotation, it's not evil, right? In the sense that God is not blameworthy for the existence of hell. But we use the word evil to also mean scary, disgusting,
Ugly.
ugly, to mean these kinds of things as
So,
well.
but many people do find God's creation of hell blameworthy. What do you say to them?
I would say everybody finds God's creation of hell to be blameworthy until they actually read about the people who go to hell, right? I don't think I don't think anybody does not wish hell upon Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah, but I mean that. But the thing is like, okay, Bibi Netanyahu, I get that one. But why the woman in let me not name a state, so they. But why a woman in a random village in a random town, or a man, they heard about Islam, but they hate it because they're a little redneck or whatever.
So,
You know.
and my answer to that is always, first, you're not God,
Mm,
right? So, for you to say that person's going to hell, how do you know that,
mm,
right? There is the majority view of the Ash'ari, which is that belief in one God is mandatory for all peoples. But what the difference of agreement between the mutakallimin tells you is at the end of the day, you're not God. You cannot point at anybody and say you are going to hell.
Therefore, you can't blame God for someone going to hell because you don't even know
Because
if
you don't
they're
even
going
know
to
if that
hell.
person's going to hell.
I see. I see. As a child, I used to hear stories of Muslim heroes who helped build, heal, and save the world around them. I used to hear stories of Mahmud Saifuddin Qutuz practicing with his wooden sword when he was just a little boy. So I asked myself, what's my wooden sword? And then I realized what our enemies have realized, that the online world is also another battlefront, and the Muslims are actually winning. And we believe and intend for this show to be on the front lines. We only made it this far through the help of Allah and our dear Ansari members. If you believe in what we're building, become a member of the Ansari podcast. Join our membership program by clicking the link below and help us grow into something that can change the world. Assalamu alaikum. Now back to the show.
So, how does all of these tangents tie back into debate, right? The major problem that you have in debates is that what Muslims are feeling most acutely as a society, as a culture, as a community, as a civilization, really, is a distinct feeling of insecurity. And that insecurity, imagine that you're somebody who has been bullied their entire life for being ugly, okay? Imagine that you are somebody, since you were a child, you grow up and all you hear is, oh, your brother's so much better looking than you, your sister's so much better looking than you, oh, it's okay, someone will marry you for your personality, that kind of thing, right? And your friends kind of call you, the ugly one, and the bullies in school all bully you for being ugly. And none of the girls give you attention and all of this stuff, right?
Right.
Like you grow up with this distinct feeling, insecurity of being ugly. It's deeply baked into you, right? Even if at a later point in your life you become handsome, you'll always feel somewhere in you that this is fake, that actually I'm ugly, because it's something that's been programmed into you, okay? And the thing with Muslims is that we are constantly ridiculed for being stupid, for being terrorists, for being extremists, for being zealots, for being backwards, for being. So we grow up with this intense amount of insecurity. And not only are we ridiculed for it, the people who ridicule us for it are the ones who hold authority in society. They hold the intellectual, the cultural, the political, the financial, the social, the artistic authority in society over us, right? And so we grow up with this continuous chip on our shoulder, with a continuous deep sense of insecurity about being not good enough and stupid. For that society to be able to meet someone in debate and show that actually we can go toe to toe with you, it does something for them. It makes them feel a certain way about themselves. You don't even have to win those debates. You just have to you just have to look like you were able to keep up. It gives you a sense of izzah. But that is really, like, if you want to fix that, right?
Izzah is honor.
Honor, yes. It gives you a sense of honor. Is that something healthy? I think it's like an Advil, right? Where Advil doesn't take away the injury. It lowers the feeling of pain. But it's an Advil when you've got a gunshot wound. It ain't going to do much. And that's also one of the reasons why you get hooked on it. Is because it's constantly making you feel like, okay, this is going to give me the izzah, this is going to give me the honor, this is going to give me the feeling of security, but it's never going to do it. Because there is deep emotional work that needs to be done with your relationship with your own Islam. And until you do that, until you feel secure in being Muslim, you're always going to be looking for something that is going to give you the sense from the outside that it's okay being Muslim.
You need proof.
You need proof.
Almost the one that these online guys are debating is the viewer, the Muslim viewer. It's heartbreaking to hear you say this, and I know, and I pray, and I believe, and I hope that our generation is different. But even watching this FIFA World Cup, man, just the arrogance of these Europeans irritates the crap out of me. Just the fact that they feel above us, that these Americans just naturally feel, these non-Muslims just naturally feel above. It irritates the crap out of me because I know it's not true. And I really want to show them that it's not true. But then when they cite how much they've destroyed our lands, when they cite how much they have increased in computer and technology and industrial revolution, and then you're just sitting there trying to grab at straws of some golden age, it's just so infuriating.
You want to hear the really interesting thing? The Europeans are insufferable. I've had my fair share of run-ins with Europeans. There is no one who is as insufferable as a European towards Muslims. But there's a reason for that, because now the Europeans feel exactly the same way we do. Because Europeans are has-been empires. They don't matter. The kinds of things Europeans say to your face, you will never hear an American say, unless they are like white nationalist Americans.
Why is that?
And why are white nationalist Americans, why would they say it to Muslims? For the same reason the Europeans do, because the white nationalists also realize that white nationalism in America has been ideology. But if you go to an American who is, well adapted to America today, he'll never say that type of stuff to Muslims to his face.
Why is that?
Because people who are on the top don't have to prove it by showing that you're on the bottom. It's just self-evident.
So the Europeans are also insecure.
When was European relevant in world politics last? 1946. Not even 1946. 1939.
I mean, the way Trump has been treating them is quite embarrassing.
It's hilarious.
It really showed how much America controls them. I had no idea it was this bad.
Oh, it's horrendous, right? It's horrendous, and that's really why the Europeans are so disgusting towards Muslims, is because they have to find the one population that they can take their malice out on, that they can take their deep-seated insecurity out on, because they all know there has been empires.
The thing is the Europeans reference medieval times more than the Renaissance.
Oh.
They know they are the ugly duckling. They know that they actually have been ugly for most of their history. They have been a bucket of poop throwing society for a long time.
It's interesting. The European narrative about the Enlightenment is what creates their own insecurity. Because the European narrative, the Enlightenment narrative, was that the Middle Ages were destitute and terrible and horrible, and from basically from the beginning, from the fall of the Roman Empire all the way till the Renaissance, right? They were like that 1,000-year gap. They were completely worthless. And then the Renaissance happened and people slowly became more worth it. Then the Enlightenment happened and boom, the Europeans were everything, right?
Okay, so why are we feeling insecure if it's been a back and forth? If they haven't been on for 1,000 years out of the 1,400 years we were on top. Why are we insecure?
Because we haven't been on top for the last 250 years, right? Like,
But that's it.
That's a long time. That's a long time. And you also have to remember, civilizations don't have memories. Human beings have memories, right? Civilization. This is a fallacy. It's called the fallacy of reification, and the fallacy of reification is to treat non-human things like they're humans. Right.
Like civilization.
Exactly. Like civilization is a dude who's like, hanging out at the hookah bar. He's not, right? There's no such thing. There's no such physical entity as a civilization, right? Okay. A civilization is an amalgam of humans, okay, right? You were not born when the Muslims were 2 steps away from taking Vienna, right? You weren't there. You weren't watching it on ONN, the Ottoman News Network, right? You did not exist. The only the only world you have known is one in which Islam doesn't have Izzah.
So,
right?
Do you think that everything that we've been dealing with as an ummah can be summed up with our love for these online debates? Because of this insecurity? And then what does this insecurity lead us to here?
I would say that the thing that we have been struggling with most for the last 2.5 centuries is insecurity. And we are deeply insecure about what it means to be Muslim, and particularly what does it mean to be Muslim within the contemporary world. And that is because we have this deep-seated feeling that this world belongs to someone else. It belongs to Western European powers. And therefore, we cannot have a part in it. If we want to be Muslim, we cannot be under the Western hegemony. And then it starts this really weird tug of war in our mind, which is, how do we live in a world while also feel as if we are Muslim outside of this world, right? And that
you're talking about the world of postmodernism, the world of modern society.
The world we live in today, our existence, our reality in this contemporary moment.
Okay.
Right? This is the most difficult challenge of being Muslim in modernity, right? It is, we don't know how to reconcile being us in what we feel is someone else's world. And we don't also know how to imagine what it would mean to be us in a world that, like, the last time we had our own world was in the Middle Ages, in the early modern era, right? And so every time we start imagining what it might feel to be us in a world that we actually have control over, or that we have authority over, we start looking backwards.
We picture the Middle Ages.
Exactly, we picture the Middle
We're almost
Ages.
like hoping for World War III so we can go back to
Exactly, right? and this is one of the reasons why Muslims are constantly being like, oh, this is why the modernity this and the modernity that, is because what we're hoping for is to be able to show the catastrophic failure of someone else's world, so that we can then somehow have this collapse of this other person's world and then slip out from under it and create our own, right? And that kind of thinking is a kind of thinking that is one of two things. It either makes you withdraw from the world that you're living in entirely emotionally, like completely emotionally withdraw from it, or to sit there hoping and working for the collapse of it. It cannot have a world in which you are actively engaged in building within that world. because you believe that that world does not belong to you, it belongs to someone else.
Hmm.
And all of that comes down to a desperate feeling of insecurity.
And is that true? I mean, it does feel like this world doesn't belong to us. We didn't make any of it, honestly. Like we didn't. We have no control over AI. We're not leading in that at all.
Does the world actually belong to someone else? I would say the world doesn't belong to anyone.
Hmm.
To say that the world belongs to someone is to, again, take part in the fallacy of reification.
But what about, like, you look at the Western society and even Japanese and Chinese, and they feel more elegant. They feel more civilized. They feel more open in thought. They feel more organized. They feel more, architecture beautiful. Like, it's hard to look at Paris or to look at London or to look at New York and not feel that sense of insecurity. Like, yo, I can't find this anywhere in the Muslim world other than Hypocrite Central in the UAE.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, Karachi?
Don't get it. That, you know how much trouble we'd get in?
I was born in Karachi, okay? I can say that.
How could we look at the reality we live in today and see otherwise?
Mahmoud, I just have, the way that I think about it is, what are you going to do? Right? Muhammad Iqbal, he starts his most important prose work, which is the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, with a very profound statement, which is the Quran is a book that emphasizes action over idea.
Mm.
What are you going to do about it? This is my question for everybody. People have so many frustrations. People have so many insecurities. People have so many emotions. And my question for all of them at all times is, what are you going to do about it? Because realistically, what I see amongst Muslims is people who are so desperate and in despair about the possibility of action that they've retreated from action into feeling. Feeling is important, but feeling without action is wasted. It's all waste. And this is why I constantly, whenever I talk about this, like Muslims in modernity, I always bring us back to Muhammad Iqbal. Because Muhammad Iqbal is, he died 1938. He was born 1877, died 1938. He was a poet, and he was a philosopher. He was called himself a philosopher poet. And he was one of the most profound thinkers of the last probably 200 years for Muslims. One of his good friends, when she wrote a book, when she released the letters that he wrote her, because I don't know if you know this, but back in the day, whenever like a famous person died, like the people who they knew would compile the letters they wrote into like books and like release them. And so she did that. She took the letters that he wrote her, she compiled into a book, and she released it. At the end of that, she wrote a very interesting statement. She said that actually, I think Iqbal's life is a tragedy. And his tragedy is because he lived in India. And when I first read that, when I started studying Iqbal, I was kind of flabbergasted by that statement, that she would say that his life is a tragedy. I mean, this man became the spiritual founder of a country. He was translated into multiple languages in his own time. His own professors translated his work. He was translated into Arabic while he was still alive, like parts of it into Arabic. The national poet of Turkey became obsessed with his work. He was a personal guest of the king of Afghanistan. 50 years later, he is being read in almost every major Muslim language. How can he be considered a tragedy? And the more that I've studied Iqbal, the more I think Atiya Begum was the name of his friend. Atiya Begum was right, that he was a tragic figure. And the reason why I think that he was right is that for all of his profundity and all of his incredible, really profound work, had he lived in Germany as he wanted to, when he was in Germany, had he stayed in Germany when he wanted, had he stayed in the UK when he wanted to, and given all of the resources of a professor and intellectual in the UK, and all of the free time, because in India, he was a lawyer. He was from 9 to 5. He was a lawyer, and all of the intellectual work he did was, after man had 2 wives too. So like, I mean, it wasn't like he had free time, right? So all of the intellectual work he did was that little bit of time he had at night, and that's about it. Okay, so had he been given all of the resources of a proper intellectual in the West, he would have had a significant impact on world philosophical history. It wouldn't have just been, it wouldn't have been me talking about Muhammad Iqbal as somebody that most people don't know of in a Muslim-owned podcast, right? Muhammad Iqbal would be somebody that would be taught in Western departments of philosophy.
And why is that? What do you think is so profound about his thought?
One, he was just a genius, right? This man, he lands in Germany. He doesn't speak a lick of German. 9 months he studies German, then he defends his dissertation in German. And then he's writing poetry in German at the grave of Goethe, which is one of the major German poets. Right? He's just like the man is a genius, and there's very few times where you actually are confronted with intellect of that capacity. Second, I think Iqbal is one of the few people within Muslim history who've actually tried to confront the problem of Western knowledge or the advancements within the Western world in the different domains of knowledge. One of the things that I find that happens a lot in the Muslim world today is, and this is particularly after certain movements that have like come out of the academy, there's this idea of like, oh, that's not our knowledge, that's their knowledge, right? That's not our philosophy, that's their philosophy. That's not our way of thinking, that's their way of thinking. Muslims in the past did not do this. Muslims in the past did not say that, oh, that's their philosophy. According to our philosophy, we don't believe this. Because, when Ghazali's writing his refutation of the incoherence of the philosophers, which is refutation of metaphysics at the time, Ghazali is not saying, by the way, I am going to simply present our view, and then I'll just let you know that our view is different from the philosopher's view. No. He attacks philosophy, and he attacks the philosophers who are who hold.
They're like atheists, right?
Not so. There's a series of questions. They're not atheists. They just don't have the same conception of God as we do, right? Especially the idea of a creator God, a God who's involved in all things like that, a personal God, as we would call it. And so, that personal God doesn't mean a God who fits in your pocket. A personal God means a God who actually has a personal character. He's actively involved as an agent in the universe. Aristotle's God is what's sometimes called the first mover. There's a whole domino set up, and
that's stupid. Yeah.
And so it's like a deist's God in the sense, right? So Ghazali isn't satisfied with simply saying that the philosophers are not Muslim. It's like, no, duh, honey, right? Aristotle, nobody's saying Aristotle's a Muslim, right? Ghazali wants to show that the ideas that are within philosophy at the time are incoherent even within philosophy's own logic. And the reason why he wants to do this, and the reason why Muslims have always had this confrontational attitude towards knowledges that are not their own. But it's not just confrontational, by the way. It is part confrontational, part educational, where there are certain things that, like Aristotle's logic, or not Aristotle's, I mean, just this logical systems that are coming out of Greek philosophy are very useful. The logical formulas, the different ways that you build taxonomies, things like that. And so the Muslims benefit from that considerably. In medicine, they benefit from it considerably. In rhetoric, they benefit from considerably. Mathematics, you name it. Astronomy, right? Why? Because they don't have an insecurity about this being Greek versus Muslim. What they're interested is in the truth. And they have a very fundamental belief that is embedded within their mind. And that is two elements of it. The first is whatever is shared human experience can actually be collectively as human beings discovered together. You don't need to be a Muslim to make a discovery in astronomy that a Muslim can benefit from. You don't need to be a Muslim to make a discovery in medicine that everybody can benefit from and that Muslims can benefit from, right? But they had a second belief as well, which is wherever something contradicts a necessary belief in Islam, for sure Islam is correct. We just have to show it logically. And that is what makes Muhammad Iqbal really, really interesting. Because almost everyone else, starting from that moment on, right, starting from the colonial moment, makes a distinction between our knowledge, their knowledge. And Muhammad Iqbal is one of those people who sits and he says, no, it's not our knowledge, their knowledge. It's knowledge. And what part of the knowledge can we actually incorporate into our way of thinking? And what part of that knowledge do we have to push against? And Iqbal more or less masters Western philosophy. Absolutely masters Western philosophy. Like I'm doing my dissertation on his major work, the Javidnama. And his understandings of what is happening in Western philosophy is at a higher level than most of the Western philosophers of his time themselves. He is a stupendous mind when it comes to that. He's also masters Eastern philosophy, our philosophy, right? Muslim philosophy. And he has a very, very acute and delicate understanding of how everything fits together. And Iqbal, one of the most important elements of him is that he's also a forward thinker when it comes to what is happening in the world. One of the central questions that he has in his entire project is, what is the point of revelation? And not just what is the point of revelation in general, what is the point of revelation in today's world? Because and he starts a reconstruction and he ends the reconstruction, which is his major philosophical work in English. He starts and ends a reconstruction with a series of questions. The question that he begins the reconstruction with is that, in this world today, we have to figure out three major questions. We've come to a point in our knowledge where we no longer know the answer to three major questions. And that is, what is the nature of reality? Is there a God? And what is our role in the universe? And he ends the reconstruction with more or less a statement that if Islam doesn't answer those three questions today, there is no other force in humanity that will be able to answer those questions. And I think one of the most profound things about Iqbal is he basically diagnosed the rest of human history for the next 86 years.
How so?
Because this is the problem of the world today. The problem of the world today is that we don't understand the three most fundamental questions about what existence even is. We don't know what's real anymore and what's not real. Right? All the debates that we're having about relativism and what is true and what's not true, what is right and what's not right. Today we have more information and less knowledge than we've ever had. What I mean by that is we have more information about a gazillion different things and less anything that we can certainly say this is the truth.
So how do you think Muhammad Iqbal would react, or what do you think he would say as someone who's getting your doctorate degree in it? What do you think he would say to the modern world and how Muslims live in it?
I think what he would say is that we've had 86 years to show the world what the truth is. and what the place of humanity is in the world. And for 86 years, we've not done that.
86 years? Because of TV, radio? What are you talking about?
I mean, he died in 1938.
Okay.
Yeah. So, since his death, we've had, 86, 87 years to show humanity what Islam does for the world. We've not been able to do that. Part of it is, the nationalist movements that ripped through the Muslim world. And by the way, he was a huge critic of nationalism. And in fact, he very much believed that nationalism was going to drain the civilizational spirit of the Muslim world, which, again, ended up happening. Part of it is because, even after the independence movements, the colonial powers remained. They just didn't remain in the same form. It became indirect economic colonialism. It was no longer direct military colonialism, right? There's a series of reasons for it, but I think the most important of it comes down to even we as Muslims don't know what we're doing for the world.
Okay. Do you know? Does Iqbal know?
So Iqbal's central point in all of this is that the problem of philosophy and the problem of science is that they break things down to very minute levels of discussion, but they have a very difficult time pulling out to the grand level and seeing how everything fits together. So a philosopher can tell you a whole bunch about how we come to know things, but he can't define knowledge. This is actually a really major problem of modern philosophy. Modern philosophy can't define what knowledge is. And there's, a whole series of problems and Gettier problems and, all sorts of issues. So a philosopher can literally break down every single way that a human being can find knowledge, but he doesn't know what knowledge is. A scientist can break down every molecule in a chemical, but he can't tell you the moral usage of it. The problem of the world today is that we have our knowledge has gone all the way to the granular level, but the systems that used to organize society in such a way that we knew how to make sense of all of it in our day-to-day lives as well as how to interact with each other, that's gone. And what Iqbal says is that you can't rely on philosophy to do that. And you can't rely on science to do that. Science is only going to give you information. It's not going to tell you how all these things fit together and what you should do. And philosophy gets stuck in these kind of ruts and it can't get out of it. And so it can't tell you what to do either. And the biggest, I think the biggest proof for what Iqbal says about philosophy is actually Marxism. Marxism is a very robust theory. And Marxists are some of the most intelligent people you're ever going to meet in your life. But you put 10 Marxists in a room and you get 35 different Marxist factions. Marxism can't really organize a society because it can never agree on how to organize it. And so Iqbal says there's only really one force in this world that has ever done it. And that force is religion.
Religion or specifically Islam?
And this is another very important point of his, right? Is that there's only one force that has ever done it in the world, and that is religion. But all religions, except for the Abrahamic religions, have done it very imperfectly. And amongst the Abrahamic religions, the only religion that has done it to its highest extent is Islam. And because Islam finds a way to synthesize between what looks like contradictory elements. It has deep spirituality and it has robust legalism. It has it's radically individualistic. Like if you read the Quran, right, you are a radically individualistic person if you read the Quran. But that radical individualism ties into a radical communalism as well, where you are very community oriented. You are very constantly looking towards knowledge and ilm and things like that, but you are also very spiritual, right? The Quran takes what looks like all the opposites in the world and finds a way to synthesize all of them. And that is what makes Islam different. Where everybody else right? One of the issues with Christianity is that Christianity is such a spiritually absolutist religion that it has a very difficult time interacting with the real world, with imperfect moralities, imperfect spiritualities, things like that. So Christianity theoretically sounds great, and then whenever it comes onto the real world, it actually can't deal with the real world. Whereas if you go into Islamic law, the ulama have robust theories of how to engage with the real world morally, but in such a world as in such a way as taking into account pragmatic realities.
So how does Muhammad Iqbal have anything to do with what we started the conversation with?
The debates?
The Dawah Bros.
No, yeah. You know, one of the things that you end up with, right, is the more that you feel confident in yourself, the more the less you feel the need to fight with people. One of the major issues that we have is that we are so driven by our insecurity that we don't know what the world would look like if we took it away. It's become such a integral part of who we are, insecurity, that we don't even know what we would behave like if we took it away. And you know, there's this portion in Iqbal's Javednama where he talks about how you figure out whether you are alive or dead or just about dead. And he says in the Javednama that you have to consult 3 witnesses if you want to see if you're alive or dead or just about dead. The first witness is you have to look at yourself in yourself. The second witness is you have to look at yourself through the eyes of someone else. And the third witness is you have to look at yourself through the eyes of God. If you were to put all 3 of those in front of us, right, what portion of us would we be able to say that we ourselves feel that we are alive? That other people see us as alive, and that God sees us as alive. And I don't think that there's much of the Muslim world that would survive that test. We would either be dead or at the edge of death. The most significant contribution, I think, that Iqbal has is his idea of khudi, which is this idea that you have to have a deep sense of self-respect and dignity that comes from your understanding of your relationship between you and God. That once you understand that relationship between you and Allah, you recognize that the value in yourself doesn't have to do with how other people see you, and what other people do, and what other people say, and what other people believe, and what other people contribute. It has to do with your constant seeking of God, and your constant
want
growing
God's
of yourself.
attention. Sorry.
And your constant growing of yourself.
You want God's attention rather than humanity's attention.
Right. And so you want 2 attentions. You want God's attention, and you want your own attention on yourself. Right? The issue is when you include your relationality with other people, right? That's when you start feeling humiliated or not humiliated or this or whatnot the other, right? When it's only you looking at yourself and you looking at God, right? At Allah, the only thing that matters to you then is, am I today better than I was yesterday in my own eyes? I think, in general, Iqbal would find debate, like these kinds of entertainment debates, to be a waste of energy and resources that you could be using to do actually something meaningful with your life. The question that we have to have as Muslims is not, what do I do to entertain myself or to make myself feel better in the next moment? The question we have to have for ourselves is, what are we going to do when we face God? What are we preparing for in that moment? There's this. Iqbal goes to on his way back from the UK in 1931. He goes to the mosque in Qurtuba, and standing outside the mosque in Qurtuba, he writes a poem. The poem is called Dawah, and he ends that line with that poem with a line which says, "Falsafa aur shairi ki haqiqat kya, harf tamanna jo keh na sake rubaru," which means that what else is the reality? What else is the truth about all of poetry and philosophy, except that it is an expression of desire that I couldn't say to you, Ya Allah, face to face. If you don't have the desire to meet Allah and to show Him what you brought with you at the end of the day, then all your Islam is and all God is to you is a teddy bear. You just hug it to make yourself feel better at night.
So how do we raise a generation of Muslims that are not insecure? You know, like even when I look at Lamine Yamal, this guy, one of the top players in the world at soccer, we're half Moroccan. Could have played for the Moroccan team that just beat the Netherlands, who, by the way, were told by the guy, he's a top economist, he got the last 3 World Cups right. He got Germany right, he got France right, he got Argentina right, and he picked the Netherlands to win this year, and Morocco just beat them. And Lamine Yamal decided to go play for Spain over Morocco. And he said, because I've always dreamt of playing for Spain and the clout of playing for Spain. How do we raise a generation that believes it is honored to play for Morocco just like it is for Spain?
First of all, I know nothing about soccer. There's only one football, and in that there's no foot. Okay? It's all the GOAT is Tom Brady. Okay? I don't know nothing about no Ronaldos or, who was the other guy? Messi, right? I don't know anything about these guys. I know Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, and the GOAT is Tom Brady, even though I was a Packers fan. Okay, so that example you gave about football, like soccer football, completely went over my head. I have no idea.
Okay.
None, zero. Okay.
Though, if you know, you know. Those who listen will know.
Okay,
but you get the point.
Kind of. I kind of know how this works.
Yeah.
And the way I would say it is, even the question, I think, is asking the wrong question. Which is, this feeling of
I'm saying, how do we raise a generation that's not insecure, rather than asking, how do we raise a generation that is...
like, why does it affect you where a football player decides to play?
Because it's a show of the insecurity. It's a show of what's bothering me about...
Why does it affect you if somebody else is insecure?
Because they're a part of my ummah.
Iqbal has a really amazing line about what ummah is. Ummah is not identity. Just because someone is Muslim doesn't make him part of the ummah.
Really?
Iqbal has this really powerful line about he says in at the end of the Javednama, he says, "Chees millat, ay ke goi la ilah, hazaran chashm budan yak nigah." He says, what is nation? What is community? What is ummah? Oh, you who says la ilaha. It's for thousands of eyes to see with one sight. Someone being a Muslim does not make him a part of ummah. Someone seeing the sight of la ilaha illallah makes him part of the ummah.
What does that mean? What is seeing the sight?
So what I would answer to you is, if a Muslim decides that he's going to play for somebody else, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's betraying the ummah. If his eye is still on the sight of la ilaha illallah, if he believes that he can do some good through it, if it's not something that's just like, oh, I want clout, I want this, I want that for myself, right? Then he could not play for Morocco, but still be doing something for this millah, this ummah, that's looking with one side. If, and again, I know nothing about soccer, so I can't really talk about this
How
very well.
would you then, based off that framework of thinking, understand a figure like Mamdani?
I think Mamdani is a really good example of this. Because somebody can be the mayor of New York and still be an embodiment of what it means to say La ilaha illallah. Still have the vision of La ilaha illallah. Because if he takes the what is the role of the Muslim in America, right? Iqbal says ما ز حكم نسبت او ملتهم أهل عالم را پیام رحمتهم. He says, we are, by being associated with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a nation. But what does that mean? For the denizens, the citizens of the world, we are mercy. If Mamdani becomes the mayor of New York, and he says, I'm going to be the mayor of New York that spreads the mercy of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his sunnah to the people of New York, he can still be part of the millah without being in the nations of Islam, the Muslim world. Because we as a people have a certain role to play in this universe, in this world. And what does it mean to be Muslim is more than just, standing on, speakers corner and giving dawah to people. We have to show people that Islam is rahmah. And it's rahmah in the akhirah as well as the dunya. And that Islam that Islam that is rahmah is not just rahmah for Muslims. It's rahmah for everyone. Just because you are a Muslim doesn't mean that your mercy is going to be limited to just Muslims. That's some kind of petty nationalism. That's a petty nationalism of, oh, I'm a white person, so I'm just going to be good to white people, and everybody else is going to be damned. Or I'm a Slav, so I'm just going to be good to Slavs, and everybody else is going to be damned. That's not the way a Muslim thinks, right? I mean, even the mere presence of the Prophet ﷺ was mercy for the kuffar. How? Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُعَذِّبَهُمْ وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ. That Allah is not going to punish the kuffar as long as the Rasul ﷺ is present amongst them. Just his presence protected them from the punishment of Allah.
Well, what would you say to someone that says, well, Mamdani is not even, everyone is giving all the credit to his leadership to socialism, and it's not credited to his Muslim identity, which Mamdani leads like a Muslim. Everything he's the way he acts, the way he goes up and shakes people's hands and smiles and speaks, that's completely prophetic. It's completely from Islam. He didn't get that from socialism, but socialism's getting all the credit. He's all the transgender LGBTQ parade and so on. He's a Shia and whatever. What would you say to someone that tells you that? How could you, blasphemous, how could you say that he's a part of the millah?
What I would basically say is, I mean, these are actually all like questions that have been long debated and put to rest within Islamic history. Right? One of the major differentiations that people made in the Islamic Church early on, and we're talking about like during the Sahaba, was whether major sins takes you out of Islam or not. Right? And everybody said that no, major sins. All Ahl Sunnah said major sins do not take you out of Islam. And so, somebody could do a major sin and still be Muslim. And God help us, there's a lot of people who are protesting what a politician might do who take advantage of the fact of that ruling of still being Muslim while committing major sin themselves every single day, right? Gossiping and backbiting is a major sin. Riba is a major sin. Zina is a major sin, right? So one thing I would say is a major sin doesn't take you out of the millah. That's one. Two,
And that's regarding LGBTQ, I think.
I mean, that's regarding whatever you might disagree with them, right? You have to have benefit or doubt of a person.
Right.
The second thing that I would say is there's a reason why people want to credit it to socialism. And that is because no one wants Mamdani to be the Muslim mayor of New York. Except for Muslims, but even some Muslims, they don't, right?
There's so many liberal ones in New York, like far left, but go on, sorry.
Nobody wants Mamdani to be the Muslim mayor of New York at an ideological level. Everyone wants Mamdani to be the socialist mayor of New York at the ideological level. And the reason for that is because neither the socialists nor the conservatives want to have to deal with Islam as something that can solve problems.
Yes.
Right? So the socialists all want Mamdani to be the socialist mayor of New York, because if he's the Muslim mayor of New York, religion's just like for the liberals and the socialists, religion's just a paint. It's like race. It's like, do you like biryani or do you not like biryani? Right? Religion is like biryani. It's like what God you worship doesn't matter. What matters is the ideology you have. Right? Nobody wants him to be the Muslim mayor of New York because nobody wants to deal with the idea that maybe religions do matter more than just, what God you worship on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday. And as Muslims, we do ourselves a disservice in this. We do ourselves a major disservice in this. And the reason why we do it, pointing at someone's imperfections and saying that, this takes him outside of the fold or whatever, is much more dangerous than to say that this person can be imperfect, but the perfections that he does have come from us.
You said that you have to know your role as a Muslim in the West. What is that role, according to Iqbal?
I think our role is to show people that when you have a mission in this world, and that mission is a God-aligned mission, right? To be actual caretakers of the world, then you interact with the elements of modernity very differently than they interact with today. Today, all of the elements of modernity are destructive. And the reason why they're destructive is because humanity does not believe itself to have an objective other than itself. This is what Iqbal says, ilm be ishq ast az taghutiyan, ilm ba ishq ast az lahutiyan, which is that knowledge without love here meaning basically love of God, knowledge without love is from demonicness, and knowledge with love is from divinity.
That's beautiful.
So if we don't show the world what it means to have knowledge with love, science with love, philosophy with love, all of these things with the love of God, then we haven't fulfilled the point of Islam.
SubhanAllah. Then you end up with a bunch of demonic ideologies. Interesting. What would you say to people? Do you believe that the future of the Ummah includes the Shias?
I'm just going to answer that with Iqbal. And Iqbal has a poem, Jawab al-Shukr, where he says, मनफअत एक है इस कौम की नुकसान भी एक है सबका नबी दीन भी ईमान भी एक हरम पाक भी अल्लाह भी कुरान भी एक कुछ थी बड़ी बात होते जो मुसलमान भी एक. He says, the benefit of this nation and the loss is one. The religion is one. The prophet is one. Allah the Haram and the Quran is one, why is it such a big deal for Muslims to be one? These theological debates have been dealt with over the last 1400 years. They've been dealt with. Their answers are all there, right? And for the majority of Ahl Sunnah, there is 3 levels of what it means to be Muslim. There is to be Ahl Sunnah. There is to be Mubtadi'.
What's that mean?
Mubtadi' is a deviant,
Okay.
right? An innovator or a deviant. And both, and there's a fasiq, right? The first 2 are in aqidah, and the third is in action. Okay.
Fasiq is almost like
It's somebody who just
a
drinks and parties and gambles and like just all the wrong stuff.
right.
The Ahl Sunnah, like the person Ahl Sunnah who doesn't commit major sins, as well as the innovator and as well as the fasiq, the person who is a corrupt person. All 3 of them are within Islam. My question that I have is, how much of the people who are enemies of Islam's work are you doing for them? How much of the work are you doing for them? Like, sometimes with friends like these, you don't need enemies.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And honestly, the most intelligent thing possible, right, was when certain countries were being goaded to attack Iran in this war, and 2 of them basically said, "We're not in this." Right, and in fact, the former Qatari foreign minister, as well as the former Saudi foreign minister, both said clearly, "This is not our war. We're not involved in this." And then Turki bin Faisal, he said openly that what they want to do is to get us to fight each other and then sell us the weapons.
Yeah.
Right? My question is, how much of the people who don't like Islam's work are you doing for them?
I was very proud of the Muslim states for recognizing that. I was afraid they were going to fall for it. I was very worried about that.
Oh, bro. La ilaha illallah. All I gotta say is Pakistan's in the butt.
I mean, Pakistan's coming in clutch with those nukes.
Zindabad.
Pakistan's in the butt. Let's go, baby. Honestly,
Bro.
You heard that? Pakistan, when they got word from China that the Israelis were going to try to assassinate the Iranian delegation a week ago, when that Pakistan told Israel, "We'll nuke you if you kill them."
Look, all I know is when Pakistan turned out to be the chief negotiator or the chief mediator, I wore my green and white kurta, which, by the way, is not my Pakistani. It was not on purpose, but it just turned out to be my Pakistani, what I call my Pakistani flag suit. And I took a picture, put it on Instagram, and said Pakistan's in the bud.
Why? Like, what's the point of happiness there? Is it because they're the mediator?
Yeah, because, bro, we were in a really, the entire Muslim world almost collapsed. If the Arabs had fought with Iran, the entire Muslim world would have collapsed. We were this close.
Yeah.
Because the Pakistanis had an agreement with Saudi. If they get pulled into the war, Pakistanis get pulled into the war. The entire Muslim world is this close. Right? Then does Iran start shooting into Turkey? Now what happens?
I didn't think about that one.
Right? The entire Muslim world was this close to collapse.
Oh, they would have loved that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was the whole point, bro. That was the whole point.
Yeah.
The whole point was to make it a complete pig's breakfast and then break Iran into 1,000 different pieces. Use the pieces that Iran is broken into to then break Pakistan and Turkey into pieces. And then break Saudi. And now, pig's breakfast.
Yeah. We're all, if it wasn't for us running out of time, I always want to keep you and ask you more questions. But unfortunately, we're out of time here. So thank you so much, Brother Saad. That's all the questions that I have for you. Do you have any final thoughts before we head off?
My final thought is basically, Um, you have to do a lot of soul searching to be Muslim today. As long as you continue to point fingers at everyone else, we're not going anywhere. You can talk about colonialism, you can talk about imperialism, you can talk about the world order, you can talk about all of that, and it's important to recognize what we're up against. But God is not going to ask you about all the things that were done to you. He's going to ask you about what you did.
Ustadh Saad Yacoob, doctoral candidate at Georgetown University, studying Muhammad Iqbal. Thank you so much for joining the Ansari podcast. It was a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure being here.